God does things in our lives that we would never have chosen for ourselves. But His wisdom and good reasons will become evident.
Welcome to Mission 66, your daily journey through God's Word, powered by Bible teacher Dr. Luis Sayao and Transworld Radio. We're currently in the book of Genesis. Want to go deeper? Grab your free study guide at mission66.org. Now let's dive in with our teacher John Matthews and co-host Esther Sisulu.
Welcome to our program of Bible exploration, having a look at it one chapter at a time, making it easy for us to understand. Now, we've been studying the book of Genesis, and in fact, we are almost at the end of this great book that's been written by Moses as part of the 5-book section known as the Torah. Now, today, our teacher John Matthews will take us through chapters 46 and 47, describing Jacob's journey to Israel for that joyful reunion with his long-lost son. So our theme for today, foreigners in a strange land.
Esther, thank you so much. Great to be with you all again for this latest episode of Mission 66. A very warm welcome to you all. Now, you know, there's a song that goes, "The world is not my home, I'm just passing through. If heaven isn't my home, oh Lord, what would I do?" And as we look today at Genesis 46, we see Jacob and his family are willing to set out on this journey with God's guidance to a place that certainly wasn't their home. They'd never been there before. And this place is called Egypt. It was where Jacob's son Joseph was after he'd been sold into slavery by his own brothers. But due to his faith and his God-given abilities to interpret dreams, Joseph had foretold the very famine that had befallen the whole land and way beyond as well. And the Egyptian Pharaoh was so impressed with Joseph that he placed him in charge of all the food distribution. They'd had 7 years of plenty. Now they were experiencing 7 years of famine. So this was some job. Let's read then Genesis 46. So Israel took his journey with all that he had and came to Beersheba. And he offered sacrifices to the God of his father Isaac. And God spoke to Israel in visions of the night and said, "Jacob, Jacob." And he replied, "Here I am." Then he said, "I am God, the God of your father. Do not be afraid to go down to Egypt, for there I will make you into a great nation. I myself will go down with you to Egypt, and I will also bring you up again. And Joseph's hand shall close your eyes." Which meant that God was promising Jacob that Joseph would be present at his death. Then chapter 46 goes on to describe how Joseph and his father Jacob, his brothers, and their entire families end up migrating to the land of Egypt to be saved from this great famine that has overtaken Canaan. And it names each of the family heads by name. We're going to skip over that in order to save some time. So we pick up chapter 46 again at verse 26. All the persons belonging to Jacob who came into Egypt, who were his own descendants, not including Jacob's sons' wives, were 66 persons in all. And the sons of Joseph who were born to him in Egypt were 2. All the persons of the house of Jacob who came into Egypt were 70. And that list of 70 people includes the 12 tribes of Israel that were still being formed. Don't know actually if there's a connection, but there were also 70 followers of Jesus Christ described in the Gospels, including the 12 disciples. So these 12 tribes would form the people of Israel. They were in this strange land of Egypt, in a land where they really were living as immigrants. And the rest of chapter 46 describes this beautiful, joyful reunion between Jacob and his long-lost son, who he thought was dead, but now here he is in the flesh, alive. And so many happy tears were shed at that great reunion. And then Jacob, as an old man, is introduced to Pharaoh at the start of Genesis chapter 47. And Jacob and his family were there in Egypt, and they were, though, to live in a separate land called the land of Goshen. The reason for that is that the Egyptians couldn't live together with the Israelites because they held a religious belief that shepherds and sheep were an abomination, actually. But this in time turned out to be a good thing because God protects the Hebrew families in the land of Goshen, as we'll find out. And when Jacob, who was already at an advanced age, meets Pharaoh, he tells him about his family and the blessing that God was giving them, and that his years of pilgrimage on earth were 130 at that point. And then we read how Jacob, the great patriarch, blesses Pharaoh and his entire nation. And we read then in verse 11 that Joseph settled his father and his brothers and gave them a possession in the land of Egypt, in the best of the land, in the land of Ramses, as Pharaoh had commanded. And Joseph provided his father, his brothers, and all his father's household with food, according to the number of their dependents. Now, we know immigration is a hot topic in many places in the world today. Sometimes millions of people from all over the world are forced to move to another country or another city in search of more desirable conditions, or even just indeed to survive. And even the founding fathers of the nation of Israel here had to move to Egypt in order to survive. And God decides to make all this come about in the extraordinary story of Joseph, which we read about here. And once Jacob's family were established in Egypt, the Bible tells us how Joseph manages to administrate the country in such a way that the entire nation is able to survive this shocking, terrible 7-year-long famine. Verse 13 then tells us, "Now there was no food in all the land, for the famine was very severe, so that the land of Egypt and the land of Canaan languished by reason of the famine. And Joseph gathered up all the money that was found in the land of Egypt and in the land of Canaan in exchange for the grain that they bought. And Joseph brought the money into Pharaoh's house. And when the money was all spent in the land of Egypt and in the land of Canaan, all the Egyptians came to Joseph and said, 'Give us food. Why should we die before your eyes? For our money is gone.' And Joseph replied, 'Give your livestock, and I will give you food in exchange for your livestock if your money is gone.' So they brought their livestock to Joseph, and Joseph gave them food in exchange for the horses, the flocks, the herds, and the donkeys. He supplied them with food in exchange for all their livestock that year. And when that year was ended, they came to him the following year, and they said to him, 'We will not hide from my lord that our money is all spent. The herds of livestock are my lord's. There is nothing left in the sight of my lord but our bodies and our land. Why should we die before your eyes, both we and our land? Buy us and our land for food, and we with our land will be servants to Pharaoh, and give us seed that we may live and not die, and that the land may not be desolate.' And so we see here how Pharaoh becomes effectively the double owner of everything in Egypt. He owned it first, but the fact that he was king over the whole country and indeed everything in it, it also means now everyone has to trade their lands and their houses, everything that they had, in exchange for survival during this famine. And so they're required to give Pharaoh a fifth of every harvest from then on, which they were happy to do because it meant survival, it meant securing their futures. And chapter 47 then ends by telling us that the Israelites prospered greatly in the land of Egypt. Verse 27 says, "Thus Israel settled in the land of Egypt, in the land of Goshen, and they gained possessions in it, and they were fruitful, and they multiplied greatly. And Jacob lived in the land of Egypt 17 years. So the days of Jacob, the years of his life, were 147 years. And when the time drew near that Israel must die, he called his son Joseph and said to him, "If now I have found favour in your sight, put your hand under my thigh," which was the way that promises were made in that day, "and promise to deal kindly and truly with me. Do not bury me in Egypt, but let me lie with my fathers. Carry me out of Egypt and bury me in their burying place." And Joseph answered, "I will do as you have said." And he said, "Swear to me." And he swore to him. Then Israel bowed himself upon the head of his bed. And the implication there in that verse is that this is the moment of his death. And that is the end of chapter 47. And we see how God is working in the lives of the patriarchs from Jacob on down in order to form the nation of Israel. In the process, God is fulfilling every detail of those promises that he made to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And he's also fulfilling the dreams that Joseph had with the sun, the moon, and the 11 stars bowing down to him, where the sun and the moon represented his dad Jacob and the 11 stars represented his 11 brothers. And here they are bowing down to Joseph in Egypt. And now his entire family have moved as immigrants into a foreign land. There are many today who know exactly what that is like. Perhaps as you listen to Mission 66, you have had such an experience, to be uprooted from your homeland, to travel to a different part of the world in search of a better life, or maybe in search of mere survival. And we know missionaries are sometimes called, aren't they, to go to a land which is foreign to them, to reach people with the vital eternal news of the gospel. The Apostle Paul was one of those trailblazing missionaries. He wrote how God is the provider of all, and God is the one who determines the exact places where man shall live. Perhaps God is doing something in our day, bringing people across borders for them to hear something that saves their souls forever, the gospel of Jesus Christ. The God of the Bible, you see, is willing to accept everybody who trusts in him, no matter where you come from. In heaven there will be, as it's written in the Bible, people from every tribe, every tongue, and every nation who have responded to the magnificent gospel invitation and have received the salvation of Jesus Christ.
You're listening to Mission 66, and this is a program of Bible study with our teacher, John Matthews. I'm Esther, and you know, I've always had this question, John, that I would very often wonder about. Okay, firstly, we read about the journey of Jacob and his sons to Egypt and how they settled there and they grew in this very great multitude. And they would eventually then leave Egypt in the Exodus hundreds of years later. But I wonder, whatever happened to the Hebrew people who remained back in Canaan?
Yeah, the Bible doesn't say anything about them, Esther. Genesis only records the migration of Jacob's family, 70 in all, into the land of Egypt. And then, as you said, they multiplied into a great number. So of the others, we don't know.
Okay, here's another question for you, John. What would have happened if Joseph's brothers hadn't sold him into slavery in Egypt? Have you ever wondered that? I mean, would they have all starved because of the famine?
Well, Esther, good question. The entire account shows us the workings, doesn't it, of an all-knowing, all-seeing God who knew exactly what was going to happen long ahead of time. So God, as often he does, was working out the details in spite of human failure. It's something that's hard for us to get our minds around. Joseph clearly would never have chosen on his own to go to Egypt. But God does things in our lives very often that we would never choose for ourselves. But his good reasons will become evident, even Joseph's dad, Jacob, didn't want to go to Egypt, but when he realizes that his long-lost son Joseph was alive down there, then he agrees to go. You know, how often do things happen in our lives that make no sense at all? Tragedies, death, loss, trauma. And we think, how on earth can this be for our ultimate good? What is God doing? Is he there at all? Well, you know, we see dimly, and we only see tiny fragments of life's tapestry before us. And on its own, it makes no sense at all. But in the words of English Puritan minister John Flavel, he said this: "Providence is like a curious piece of tapestry made up of 1,000 shreds. Each shred on its own appears useless, but put together, they represent a beautiful history to the eye. Our sight is short and flawed. God's sight is eternal and perfect."
John, if Canaan was the land that was promised to Jacob, why would he then pack up his whole family and move them to Egypt and stay there?
Well, Esther, they had faith that Egypt was temporary, much like our lives in this world are temporary. And at that point, I believe God shows up to Jacob and he says, "Listen, I am in control of this situation. My promise to you still stands, and your descendants will inherit the land of promise." It took hundreds of years for that to happen, but God is not tied, nor is he worried about our timelines.
Looking at chapter 46, verse 34, a very strong statement was made there. Why were the shepherds detestable to the Egyptians?
Yeah, now today that would be described as discrimination, wouldn't it? But looking at the Egyptian context, it had much to do with their religious rituals. So Egyptian culture practices something that was called zulatry, the worship of animals. And the Israelites performed animal sacrifices, particularly with sheep, and that offended the Egyptians, which is why they insisted that they be kept separate. Now remember that theologically speaking, Egypt is a type or a representation of the world system that is against God. Christians are taught to be in the world but not of it, like a boat is in the water, but the water does not get into the boat. If it does, that boat sinks. So God decides to preserve his people in a way that they live with the Egyptians, but they would not become like them. And the lines of separation are clearly drawn, with the Hebrews told to live in the land of Goshen, which they do.
Wow, God he works in such wise and interesting ways. This is amazing. All right, so let's talk about this land. What is the land that they're exploring here? Because we read in chapter 47, verse 11, that this is the land of Ramesses.
Yeah, the land of Ramesses, it's just another name actually for the land of Goshen. And so this is good land near the mouth of the Nile, and land that is separate from the rest of Egypt. So it's as simple as that, really, Esther.
Well, continuing in chapter 47, it looks to me like Pharaoh, and with the full consent of Joseph, was taking unfair advantage of the people during the famine.
Yeah, well, Pharaoh is the king of the land, so one could say that everything actually belongs to him in the first place. But yes, during the time of Joseph, Pharaoh undoubtedly benefits financially due to the forethought and the insight of who? Joseph. But he owned it all anyway, so in effect, he is the omnipotent ruler, if you like. And later on, as we get to the law of Moses, we see that in Israel, there's a piece of land that couldn't be sold to someone else forever. It would always revert to its prior owner at the year of Jubilee. So there's this private ownership in Israel and this medium of exchange, but it's always God who had ultimate ownership. For that matter, he owns our very selves, because nobody eats unless God provides. Nobody breathes his air unless God gives the ability and the air. Nobody's heart beats another time unless God allows.
Something else that we read about in this chapter, at least chapter 47, John, is the passing of Israel, Jacob. So why do you think he insisted on being buried back in Canaan?
Well, this shows us that the patriarchs of Israel believed that they were united in death as well as in life. So when one of them dies, they wish to be buried along with their fathers. So Jacob asks to be buried in the same cave of Machpelah that their forefather Abraham and Sarah were buried in a long time ago. So this reveals that attitude of solidarity with their forebears. Also, Jacob considered Canaan to be the land of God's covenant with him.
Okay, so Jacob arrives in Egypt, and in chapter 47, it says that he bestows a blessing on Pharaoh. And I don't know, could this have possibly been an offense to Pharaoh? I mean, he was worshipped almost as like a demigod by his own people in Egypt. So this man coming from a foreign land, bestowing this blessing upon him, what do you think?
So Jacob bestows this blessing on Pharaoh, and he may well, I think, have been suggesting that, yeah, Egypt is a powerful nation, but Pharaoh, you are great in the world's eyes, but all the authority that you have is given to you by the all-powerful God of my fathers. So in other words, there is one who is so much greater than you, Pharaoh. In fact, Esther, what an understatement. God is so much greater than the universes themselves. They are just a small part of his creation, his creative perfection. And the verse comes to mind, what is man that you are mindful of him?
Well, thanks for that, John. That was absolutely beautiful. Now, I think we should take a moment or two to summarize these two chapters.
So today, in chapters 46 and 47, then, Esther of Genesis, Joseph, after saving his family from the terrible famine, is able to bring his entire family from the land of Canaan to enjoy the plenty, actually, that was stored up in Egypt. And it's a picture of how God provides for those who love him, even when all hope seems to be lost. What a lovely picture. And just picture Jacob's situation. He thought he'd lost Joseph. Then two more of his sons are missing, and they're all facing starvation when all of a sudden the sons come and report that everything is more than okay. Joseph is alive, and he's one of the chief rulers in Egypt. And he's inviting us to all go down there and live and be saved. You know, none of Joseph's story may have sounded very good at first because it involved betrayal, slavery, prison. But God, there's those two words again, Esther, but God uses Joseph for incredible good, to provide food for the entire land of Egypt, also for Jacob's family. And you know, God is always on time. His promises are perfect, which means they never fail. Trust in the God Almighty. Learn his word, the Bible, for all of human history is under his power. Don't lose faith in him because we can't make sense of our problems here on earth, as significant and insurmountable as at times they may seem to be. They hurt. They cause us despair sometimes. But you know, God sees and knows the beginning from the end. He can be trusted completely and will one day bring us who believe in him home. And then all will be so much more than well. He is the God of all people who love and follow him.
Well, that concludes our lesson for today, dear friends. I hope that you will be with us again in our next episode where we go even further into the book of Genesis. Well, I'm Esther for John and our team saying, see you next time on Mission 66.
As Mission 66 comes to a close, be sure to download your free study guide at mission66.org. Deepen your daily devotion with insights from each episode, and let John and Esther lead you through the scriptures. Get your study guide at mission66.org and be prepared for our next episode. There, you can also connect with us, ask questions, or donate to help Mission 66's worldwide outreach. Head to mission66.org. Mission 66 is made possible through Transworld Radio in partnership with Dr. Luis Sayao.